In the war's final days, as Germany crumbled, the Luftwaffe unleashed one last desperate weapon: German kamikazes. Teenagers in near unarmed planes ordered to crash into American bombers. By early 1945, Germany's Luftwaffe was collapsing. Years of war had drained its pilots, its fuel, and aircraft. Allied bombers now flew unchallenged over the Reich. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, was crippled, its pilots outmatched and its numbers dwindling. January's Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate counteroffensive, ended in disaster, wiping out many of the last skilled airmen. A post-war analysis summed it up. The Luftwaffe was overwhelmed by Allied numbers and its own shortages. The air force that once terrified Europe was nearly finished. In this crisis, German leaders grew desperate. Conventional defenses had failed. Advanced jets like the Me-262 were too scarce, often grounded by lack of fuel. Facing total defeat, Luftwaffe commanders, with quiet approval from the German High Command, considered a radical tactic. If they could no longer shoot down Allied bombers, perhaps they could crash into them. It was a last grim gamble from an air force on the brink. The idea of ramming enemy bombers wasn't new. German pilots had occasionally done so out of desperation earlier in the war, and the Soviets had even formalized such terrain attacks. The concept found a key advocate in Colonel Hans-Joachim Hermann, a decorated Luftwaffe officer known for innovative strategies. As Germany's position grew dire, Hermann proposed forming a special unit of volunteers to cripple Allied bombers by ramming into them. Initially met with doubt, the plan gained support from desperate German leaders. Goebbels and other propagandists spun the tactic as heroic self-sacrifice. Recruitment began in late 1944 for Sonderkommando Elbe, named after the Elbe River. Most recruits were barely out of their teens, shaped by years of indoctrination. Sonderkommando Elbe wasn't officially a kamikaze unit. Pilots were told to bail out just before impact. In practice, that meant a slim chance of survival, but only like 10%. Still, propaganda painted them as patriotic saviors, not kamikaze. Training was minimal. These young men weren't taught dogfighting or formation flying. There was no time or fuel. They learned only the basics of flying and how to aim for a bomber's tail or wing. Psychological conditioning replaced rigorous preparation. Loudspeakers blared nationalistic songs, officers gave stirring speeches, and the threat of total defeat loomed over them. As Sergeant Walter Otter later recalled, "We were told to save your fatherhood, think of your women and children." By early 1945, Sonderkommando Elbe stood ready, a desperate measure from a crumbling regime built on propaganda, youthful fervor, and a grim sense of duty. The weapon of choice for the Sonderkommando Elbe was a venerable Messerschmitt Bf-109. These are among the few fighter aircraft still available in numbers to the Luftwaffe in 1945. Crucially, the Bf-109s assigned to the Elbe unit were specifically modified for the ramming missions. Every non-essential component was removed to improve speed and climb rate. Armor plating, gun cowling, radios, and even most of the guns were stripped out. Standard Bf-109s usually carried a pair of heavy 13mm machine guns and one or two 20mm cannons. By contrast, the Elbe pilots had typically just a single forward-firing machine gun and only about 50 to 60 rounds of ammunition. Essentially, these planes were almost unarmed. The true armament was the airframe itself. Lightening the fighters in this way wasn't just to save precious ammunition. It made the nimble Bf-109 quicker and more maneuverable at high altitudes. Engineers reasoned that a stripped-down 109 could more rapidly climb above the American bomber formations and then dive through the escorts to attack with greater speed. The trade-off, of course, was that each pilot had a minimal means of attack except ramming, a brief burst of machine gun fire at best, and then collision. The pilots were briefed to target one of three vulnerable areas on heavy bombers when ramming: the delicate tail assembly with its rudder and elevators, the engine nacelles, which might ignite fuel tanks if smashed, or as a grim last resort, the cockpit of the bomber. The tail was preferred, both because it was relatively fragile and because a well-aimed blow could send a bomber out of control, while possibly allowing the fighter pilot to survive. The engine area was also a potentially devastating strike zone, though hitting an engine or a wing carried a high risk of the attacker's plane being obliterated by explosion. Ramming the cockpit was considered the most gruesome and least survivable method, essentially using the propeller and nose of the Bf-109 to crush the enemy crew. Nonetheless, pilots were told to aim for whichever of these targets presented itself. To improve their odds, the Elbe pilots sought to approach from slightly above or behind to avoid immediate gunfire and then dive at high speed. Before we look at the fatal mission itself, if you found this story as compelling as I have in telling it, consider hitting the like button. It really helps small channels like mine grow. And if you're into lesser known history, subscribe for more. Now let's look at the Sonderkommando's first and only mission. After months of planning, Sonderkommando Elbe was finally unleashed on April 7, 1945. A date that would see acts of bravado and tragedy in equal measure. On that morning, Allied aerial armadas appeared over Germany as they had done nearly every day that spring. Their targets were critical German assets, aircraft factories, rail yards, and airfields in central and northern Germany. The Luftwaffe command, alerted to the massive raid, decided that this was the moment to commit Sonderkommando Elbe. Approximately 180 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters from the Elbe force took to the skies in scattered groups from various airfields, clawing for altitude to meet the incoming bombers. As they climbed to 30,000 feet, many of them could see the contrails of the approaching Allied bomber stream stretching across the sky. It was a sight equal parts awe-inspiring and terrifying. Hundreds upon hundreds of silver bombers in formation, glinting in the sun, with swarms of Mustang fighters guarding them. What unfolded was one of the most bizarre and dramatic air combats of World War II. Dozens of German fighters hurled themselves at the American bomber formations in a furious, chaotic assault. However, unlike typical interceptors, the Elbe pilots did not break away after a firing pass. Instead, they came straight on with suicidal determination, aiming to collide. Initially, many American crews were caught off guard. Allied bomber gunners were used to fighters either swooping in with guns blazing or launching rockets from a distance. Now they faced fighters that sometimes did not fire at all but simply kept coming, even as they were riddled with defensive fire. Eyewitness reports from US airmen conveyed a shock and confusion. 3 Me-109s attacked, then a single 109 came straight at the formation from the rear, recalled Second Lieutenant William Varnado, a B-17 navigator with the 385th Bomb Group. He and his crewmates watched in disbelief as a German plane bore in without veering off. We speculate that one of our gunners must have killed the pilot since the 109 kept straight on and rammed a B-17. Both the B-17 and the 109 went down. In another group, Technical Sergeant Edward Heinrichs, a top turret gunner in the 452nd Bomb Group, saw a Bf-109 approach the B-17 from behind. I thought, geez, he'd better fall off, expecting the German to break away at the last moment. He keeps on going and rammed right into the back of it. I wondered what the hell was the guy thinking of. I thought maybe he was dead already. The tail of that fortress was sheared off entirely, yet miraculously 5 crewmen of the B-17 survived, and even the ramming pilots managed to bail out alive. Such scenes were repeated across the sky in those frantic minutes of combat. The most famous encounter of the day was the exploits of Heinrich Rosner, which has taken on almost mythic status in Sonderkommando Elbe's story. Rosner managed to slip his Bf-109 into the midst of the 389th Bomb Group, which was leading the day's mission. He lined up on a B-24 Liberator named Palace of Dallas, the lead ship of the 389th formation. With no cannon and just a single machine gun at his disposal, Rosner reportedly held his fire until the last seconds, then unleashed a short burst and ploughed the Messerschmitt directly into the B-24's cockpit. The impact was devastating. The nose of the bomber was torn away, killing the pilots and the front crew instantly. Rosner's 109, damaged but still moving at high speed, then careened into a second Liberator in the formation. Incredibly, this 1-2 collision sent both B-24s falling out of the sky, yet Rosner himself survived. He bailed out amidst the burning debris and parachuted to the ground with only minor injuries. Bringing down 2 4-engine bombers in one sortie was an almost unbelievable feat, and it made Rosner something of a legend. He was one of the very few Elbe pilots to live through a successful ramming attack. When the mission ended on April 7, 1945, The result of Sonderkommando Elbe's lone operation was stark. Of the roughly 180 Bf-109 fighters launched, only about 15 returned. About 60 turned back early due to mechanical issues, while many others were shot down or lost in ramming attempts. In total, 30 to 40 German pilots were killed and only a handful survived. According to US records, about 15 bombers were attacked and just 8 were destroyed or heavily damaged, far short of the Luftwaffe's inflated claims. The mission, intended as a decisive strike, achieved little at enormous cost. Allied bomber groups quickly regrouped and completed their attacks. The following days saw massive air raids that obliterated German airfields and aircraft production facilities. The Luftwaffe, already on life support, was finished. Sonderkommando Elbe was never deployed again. To German propagandists, the mission was a heroic stand, but many Luftwaffe officers saw it as a tragic waste of young, poorly trained pilots thrown into a suicidal mission under patriotic slogans. These airmen, mostly barely out their teens, had been led to believe that their sacrifice might turn the tide. Allied forces, while shocked by the ramming tactic, largely dismissed it as a desperate last act. American leadership downplayed the event publicly, hoping to avoid panic among bomber crews. The mission barely registered in the broader war effort. By month's end, Hitler was dead, Berlin was falling, and the war was all but over. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Odd Historian. If you'd like to know more about the Luftwaffe's last days, check out Last Days of the Luftwaffe. The link is in the description. And check out my Patreon for exclusive content and other awards. See you next time.